Hello, and welcome to Cannabis the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tori Rarick. Each episode will feature a candid conversation about how the cannabis plant has positively impacted individuals' wellness and bliss. Here to honor the plant and have fun. This episode is brought to you by Illuminate Mindset Academy, my signature program where I guide you through making mindfulness a lifestyle. This investment in your brightest self includes personalized one-on-one coaching, focusing on your specific alignment, attitudes, and actions, lifetime access to the online Illuminate course, which covers my 8 essential principles: clarity, self-reflection, authenticity, confidence, surrendering, joy, stillness, and abundance. And because life is a journey, ongoing support is available in the private Facebook group and includes a monthly live stream and self-development book club. Learn to live by your intuition and worry less. Go to tidytor.com/illuminate for current rates and promotions. Be the brightest you and illuminate. Hi everyone, today we have on Alayna Jackson, cannabis educator, and she is a super cool psychedelic woman, and I'm so excited to talk to her about mindfulness consumption. So Alayna, would you please tell us a little bit more about you?
Yes, so I am really passionate about this plant as well as other plant spirit medicines that the natural world has to offer us, and a lot of my interest and passion with all of this really did stem from my own exploration with my own consciousness, with my own well-being, just kind of exploring myself as a young girl, kind of navigating the world of my 20s and being out of my nest for the first time. It was kind of culturally shocking for me as I came from a really tiny small country town. And even going to college in like a Big 10 school was a big step for me and something that was really opening my world to so many new and different things that I had never been exposed to.
Yeah.
And during this time, I was kind of navigating myself and experiencing that I was getting really positive effects from using cannabis, despite the fact that I had been told my entire life that this plant was bad and dangerous and evil, and just was really misinformed about this plant. So when I started to experience it for myself, and when I started to experience such positive reactions to it, it led me to wonder, why am I experiencing this? And why has this been so demonized all of my life? And that is ultimately what led me down this huge rabbit hole where I began studying like crazy. And I began getting really personally invested in this, as I felt like I had personally been wronged. And I could only imagine how wronged other people would feel if only they realized how not dangerous this was as we were once told. So I felt this really big pull and like call to action within myself to start to be a little bit more vocal about it. Back when I was still living in Indiana, I had started to become a little bit more open about the fact that I was using cannabis, and I started a little bit more open about the fact that it did help me in a lot of ways. And I was also open about the fact that I was using it as a sleep aid. So it's always been a really effective sleep aid for me personally. And I have never taken sleeping pills before. So I've never had to turn to like a synthesized pharmaceutical for sleep. And I felt really good about the fact that I could use this plant and it was being really effective insomnia therapy for me at the time. So that's kind of where I started being a little bit more vocal, but I didn't really feel confident and sure enough about these things until I completely moved to Colorado.
Of course.
And once I moved to Colorado, and especially once I landed my job in the cannabis industry, that is really where I started to super speak up and was not fearful at all about it. And it's basically been history from there. I've kind of been known as the Ganja queen. and everyone asks me all their questions about it. And
No, like you are so well spoken, and like you're like, I have a lot of woke friends, but like that's cool. But like you are so well spoken about it. Like the way you word things is very eloquent and just like very digestible. So I really appreciate that about you.
I appreciate you saying that too, because, you know, to be quite honest, when I was growing up, I was not aware of my own intelligence and my own capabilities. And it was largely because, you know, you go to school and you're kind of being trained to be good little citizens and being trained for these particular job positions. And there's just not a lot of openness for people with creative minds who kind of do things a little bit unconventional and kind of think a little bit differently and operate outside the box. So here I was, being this creative individual, but not really having that that path, I guess, just isn't really open in schools. Like you kind of regurgitate information and you have to take these tests. And I just always felt like, oh, I guess I must not be very smart because I don't do very excellent at this style of testing or whatever. And it wasn't honestly until I got older and started to explore the things I was really passionate about in college, and I started writing a lot, and I love
like follow your bliss, you know.
Exactly. So once I started to you know, write about subjects that I really cared about and believed in, I saw that the writing came pretty natural to me. And then I started to realize, well, I guess I do have a lot more capabilities than I realized. And it's really just that I needed things that interested me more, as well as a little bit more like room to be my creative self.
For sure. I understand that for sure. Like with pharmacy school and professionalism, like I'm still getting over that. It was like so conditioned that I like couldn't be the creative side of me. And I don't know that it was intentionally that way, but it was just like what I accepted. So even to do things like this podcast and also still show up in the pharmacist space, it's like a new way of living, and I'm navigating it too. So I want to know though, enough about me. I want to know what your first experience with cannabis was like. So you're hearing all these bad things about it. Like what tempted you? How'd you get curious to try it?
Well, a lot of times you're just kind of like young and trying things just because.
Right.
Also, when I grew up in such a small country town, there is not shit to do. So you have to learn how to entertain yourself. And unfortunately, sometimes what happens is that's why people get into drugs and alcohol early.
Right.
Usually just out of a lack of other things to do. And you're like living way out in the country and have limited access to, you know, various things. So a lot of it was honestly when I was really, really young. I was exposed to it by some people that I thought were really cool. And, you know, I had gone to this little party, and, you know, it was, of course, the type of party where you like sneak out to go to the party because your parents would never let you go there.
Sure.
So I'm like really, really young and at this like secret party, and somebody there had what we referred to as like weed or pot or whatever we used to call it, and they were smoking it out of a freaking can, like a pop can.
Yeah.
So that's when I was
Classic.
like first just very classic. and that was when I was very first just exposed to it, and what kind of you know, drew my attention to it. Like, oh, this is what these people are doing. Apparently it's supposed to make you feel this particular way. Like, let's try this. So my girlfriend and I, we go to try it, but we have no idea how to smoke. Like,
oh no. And out of a can nonetheless.
Exactly. So the whole idea of inhaling was obviously very new to us. We did not know how to properly do this. So even though I tried, nothing really actually happened. Maybe it was a little bit of a placebo effect where we're like, oh my gosh, we're so silly.
Yeah.
But like nothing actually happened. And that was my very first time just being around it. And it wasn't until I was a senior in high school when we all like graduated. We were like done, like, oh, this whole chapter of our lives. Now we're all like big kids now. We're going to college. And I remember we all piled into a friend's car, and one of our known like pothead friends had brought some weed with him to celebrate, and I start to enjoy with them. And that by that time, I had basically gotten an actual effect from it. And basically, what happened was I got very relaxed as well as very giggly. Um, which I was like always pretty giggly, but the relaxed
Sure.
part was very new to me. Um, and I'll never forget that my friends who had been friends with me since I was like in elementary school, they literally were like, "Oh my gosh, we found the one thing that chills
That
Alayna
works for
out."
you. Oh my gosh. That's wild.
Well, it's because I've always been like super hyperactive. And so this
Yeah.
feeling of being so relaxed was super new to me. I had never in my whole life experienced anything like that. And also at the time, I had no idea what like yoga, meditation, breath work, I had no
Sure.
idea what any of that was at all. So I was never in this very like calm Zen state. I was always like crazy hyperactive to a point
Wild.
that
Yeah.
people thought I was like on uppers.
Right. And so like that probably was just the door opening to your healing because you had the opportunity to slow yourself down a bit.
100%. Hence why later, like just a couple years later, when I started to get a lot more into it in college, one of the first things I noticed was, oh my gosh, this helps me get to sleep and stay asleep and sleep really well, which made a lot of sense because as being a hyper kind of high strung person, you can imagine that it was common for me to be up until like 4 in the morning, just
Yeah.
my natural energy. And so it was really cool. I remember being like, wait, this is really balancing me out. And this feeling that I'm getting is really complimentary and really, I guess, just the best word I have is balancing. It
Right.
really just felt so good and complimentary. So, yeah.
That is so cool. I love that. And something that you've said has stuck with me. It was just in February when we were together, and you said cannabis heals my spiritual pain because we had some friends that it helps with their physical pain, and we're in such a physical oriented world. It's like we only acknowledge tangible symptoms, and we don't always like justify subjective or unseen traumas. And so when you said that, it's like, yeah, and that's fine. Like, that's cool. That's not that you have to have reasons to do anything or like explanations for anyone, but yeah, cannabis is also for spiritual trauma.
100%. And that definitely coincides with, when I first started to realize that everything I had been told about this is likely not very true. It made me so curious and it made my mind start working and being able to start really critically thinking on my own. And I don't really feel like I was doing a lot of critical thinking on my own previous to this. I felt like I was doing a lot of regurgitating info and doing things because I was told to do it.
Yes.
Or because I was influenced that this is the right, how things are and this is the right way to be. And for the first time in my life, I was like a young 20 something year old and starting to realize my critical thinking abilities, and which really coincided with my creativity. So all of this was part of my spiritual healing for sure. I did not even realize how spiritually oppressed I had been for so many years.
Right. That's so eye-opening. So I want to get into like what it is that you do, but like for your own personal experience, what has the relationship been like? Because I feel like for a lot of people it ebbs and flows. And what do you have to say around conscious consumption? Was there ever a time where you're like the plant isn't helping me right now, or however whatever your mindset wasn't working with it, or how do you navigate being mindful with it, your use?
Yes, thank you so much for asking that. This is definitely something I seek to spread awareness about. So, um, obviously, when I first started, it was a lot more about like, I'm just testing the boundaries of my own mind and body and like trying
Sure.
all these different substances. So in that case, it wasn't very conscious. It wasn't very intentional and mindful. But what ended up happening was when I started to realize some of the positive effects I was getting from it and the ways I could apply that to things that were useful, like getting good sleep or, doing an herbal wind down at night to kind of sit with my own thoughts and digest from the day, and do a little bit of maybe therapeutic writing or therapeutic thinking with myself. So it's one of the biggest things that had happened was in my college years, I was a big booze hound. I was like the crazy binging alcohol girl who was like getting kicked out of all the local bars.
Oh, wow.
And I was kind of known as being like the wild party animal as far as alcohol goes. Like that was definitely my thing, was being really over the top with alcohol. And so what ended up happening was, not only was I finding cannabis was helping me in all these other ways, but once I started to get super sick from my alcohol habit, I also realized that cannabis was helping me with the hangovers.
Oh, okay.
And once I realized it was helping me with the hangovers, and once I realized it was so healing in that way, which I thought was crazy at the time, and I didn't fully understand, especially on like a biological or scientific level. I did not understand how it was doing that, but I could just feel that it was. And so because of that, I eventually went down this path of really assessing myself and my relationship to substances, and why and how I use the things the way that I do.
Yeah.
And that is kind of where the biggest step of mindfulness and consciousness started to build. And it was mostly because I definitely recognized within myself eventually, after like years of misusing alcohol, I eventually was like, wait a minute, I'm consistently putting this thing in my body in high amounts that's making me really ill. And I'm doing this against my, what's actually good for me. Like I'm continuously doing this thing that makes me really sick. Why am I doing it? What's at the root of this? And eventually it was the combination of cannabis and yoga that completely skyrocketed my mind body attunement.
Yes.
And made me so much more empowered to make conscious decisions, and be so much more like consciously active in why I do the things I do, in what I choose to do with my mind and body. So it was kind of like this whole journey. And obviously in college, it was a lot more about just kind of like partying, figuring out things with your body and your mind, and just like testing the limits of yourself. But shortly after college, I was still on that booze train, but I really attribute cannabis to weaning me off of that. And now I have a completely different relationship with not only alcohol, but really every single thing that I consume in my life. And cannabis is really at the forefront of how I got there.
That's so cool. So there's so many directions I can take this, and I'm just happy to be talking to you. I don't know where to go first, but you mentioned cannabis and yoga. So I've got to bring in Ganjasana. I've got to bring in Rachel here because I know you attended her training. So yeah, how did you get to that point? Did you kind of navigate that on your own and then want to do a Ganjasana retreat? What was that?
Okay. So the first thing that had happened was when I was still back living in Indiana, I had discovered a hot yoga class. And it's kind of funny because hot yoga was the first time I ever did yoga in my entire life. And I chose to do hot yoga, which is
so intense.
Brutal. Like so brutal. So, I was naive. I had no idea. I also, just to throw this in there, I also came from a very athletic background, but all the athletics I was doing were very powerful ones where like you use a lot of, strength, and it's not about being very, like calm.
Deliberate.
Yes. Some of them were, but for the most part, I was really tapping a lot more into my strength than I was my ability to like deliberately control my body. And it was yoga that actually taught me how to do that. I had no idea how to do that. I was such a like power horse and all the things I would do, and had a very, like fast and like aggressive demeanor.
Yeah.
And it was actually this whole practice of yoga where I realized, oh my gosh, this whole practice is way more about slowing down and moving very intentionally with your breath, and having almost that like control with your body, not just using sheer force or sheer strength, which I was doing most of my life. So I do this hot yoga session and I start to feel these totally new sensations that I've never felt before. And that kind of ignited my appreciation and love for yoga as a practice. And I had only done that a handful of times before I moved here to Colorado. So that was my only experience with yoga. Then I get here, and the first thing I discovered was called Bend and Blaze Yoga. And when I discovered this, my mind blew in like a million pieces. I sat and thought to myself, no freaking way is this real. And I'm like, okay, so either the yoga must suck or maybe the cannabis sucks. Like, there's no way this can be real. But sure enough, I get myself a ticket to it. I show up and I'm like, oh my God, it's real. And
so cool.
And the yoga was excellent. The cannabis was excellent. And I was just like, whoa, this is like an ancient practice that I didn't even realize existed.
Totally.
Like, this is an ancient combination that I didn't even know about. However, I will say that even back in Indiana, when I started smoking just on the down low, one of my favorite activities was stretching. And I did not realize that this was a real practice. I just thought my stoner little self was tapping into like, ooh, have you ever stretched while I
try this?
Yeah, try this. That's like what I thought. And then I get here to realize, holy crap, this is like totally real.
Legit.
This is a real thing. This is very legitimate. And so that was my first experience. Then flash forward not too long later, I think via just Facebook, where we find most of our events and things that are going on, I saw Ganjasana. And when I started to read Ganjasana, I quickly realized that it was definitely a bit different than the Bend and Blaze experience, because I could tell that there was a whole layer of, ceremonial sacredness and, true ancient practice that was woven into this whole Ganjasana thing that at the time I didn't even really know what Ganjasana was. I didn't even really understand plant spirit medicine all the way. I was just kind of scratching the surface at all of these, even concepts.
Sure.
So, but what I did know is that it sounded heavenly. And I was like, whoa, I have to get to this experience, to get to this class. So I RSVP and I buy my ticket. And right when I show up and right when I start to do the experience, I knew for sure that this was something huge, and I was having a really profound response to it. I started to experience amounts of healing that I had never tapped into before. I started to, just get so much more empowered in ways that I had never fully been empowered before. And so I took a very quick liking to Ganjasana and to Rachel, who is a dear friend of mine today. But it's crazy because it really all just started from, seeing it on Facebook, being very curious and showing up, and then realizing, oh my gosh, this is profound therapy that really anybody could benefit from. I fully believe that almost any person can benefit from the combination of yoga and cannabis, even if it's just CBD.
Sure.
They really go hand in hand. So what happened from there is I saw Rachel was going to do another class. So I very quickly hopped on that guest list. And when I showed up, she remembered me from the time before, and I felt a really strong connection to her. And as I continued to go to class, we got to know each other. And that is how eventually, when she started doing yoga teacher training, I attended one of them back in Vermont a couple years ago, falls ago. Yeah.
That's a cool location. That's so fascinating. I love it. And so did you move out here for the cannabis industry, or how did that work out?
No. So what had happened was, when you're born and raised in a tiny little Indiana country town, if you're anything like me, you have dreams of leaving that town and experiencing what else the country might have to offer.
Yeah.
And so that's how I was. And, some people are like that, and then other people aren't. They want to stay there and, build their families there. And that's perfectly fine too. But it was always really deep within me that I knew I wanted to branch out. So even in late high school, I would fantasize about where I might end up. And then by the time I did the whole college experience, I really got motivated to explore further. And it was when Shane and I, he's my husband, it's when we graduated college, we saved up as much money as we possibly could by working really hard and being really, diligent on our savings. And we just saved every dime we could. And we did that with the intention of this is going to be our moving money so we can go start a life, that we dream of, and something that maybe suits our, personalities and how active we are and how adventurous we are. We just wanted something that suited our style a little bit better.
Right.
So I had it narrowed down to like 3 different areas of the country that I was pretty smitten with and that I thought would be a good fit after doing lots of research. And Shane ended up surprising me in 2013, and he got us tickets to this really cool music festival that was happening here in Denver, and we road tripped it all the way out here from Indiana to attend this music festival, which we're like totally concert junkies. Like we love concerts so much. That's been our thing since we were like 13. So that's a favorite pastime of ours. So this trip was really special, and we made it all the way to Colorado, and I brought a notebook with me. And in the notebook, I made like my little makeshift drawing of Colorado towns and suburbs around Denver.
Oh, cute.
And I like would write notes. We like drove there purposefully so we could drive all around.
Check
everywhere.
it out.
And so we just started scoping everything out, and I would make all these notes, and then I would like Google different houses in that area to write like the price range of places, and really narrowing down where we wanted to go. And it's crazy because that was the first and only trip that I ever took to Colorado, and it only took one trip. And my heart was like beating out of my chest.
Yes.
I was like fluttering, like my stomach was fluttering. I was like, oh my gosh, this feels so much like home. This feels like where I've always belonged. It just felt so right. And so that's ultimately like why we came to Colorado, was that just desire to leave Indiana and explore this country and explore places to start our adult lives. And Colorado really stuck with us because of its progressive nature, and because we were so adventurous. Like we love, hiking and camping and communing with the great outdoors. So if you're like that, Colorado's a freaking dream.
It is the dream.
For any of those things. Like I'm such a nature, like tree hugging person, and I freaking love all the nature here. It's just amazing. So that's ultimately why. And we were making this decision in 2013 before the recreational sales had started.
Okay.
So when we moved here early in 2014 and recreational sales had started, to me, honestly, that was just like a bonus to an already amazing place.
That's so cool. So aligned. I love it. I can like agree with so many points of that story, like leaving small town, wanting just like being here and feeling like this is it. The sun, hello, the mountains. Yeah, I'm with you. So what did you study in school? And so like when you got here, what was the transition like into working in the industry?
Well, so I had a bit of a background studying wine, like varietals of wine. And so I was working at a wine bar when I was in Indianapolis. And that's actually where I made like all of my money to come here. And it's kind of crazy because it was just like a serving position, but I made really good money doing it because it was like this nice wine bar.
Totally.
So I enjoyed doing it because there I was in Indiana being like, what does somebody like me do here? I don't freaking know.
Right.
So I just started serving because when I was serving at this place, I at least could be myself enough that I could feel good about it and I could interact with people, which I really enjoyed interacting with people. So that was like my background of just working after college.
Yeah.
But that really has nothing to do with what I studied in college.
That's okay.
I studied in college telecommunications.
Okay.
I did that because I used to think that I wanted to, like be on TV and be some sort of like news anchor or some sort of personality, or, I thought I wanted to do something that involved media, and that
Yeah.
used to be the direction I thought I was going. I actually used to host a dating show at our college campus.
Whoa.
Yeah. So that's what I thought my little self wanted. But I also was super, super passionate and interested in human nature and like human behavior. So I minored in sociology and gender studies.
Cool.
So I was always very a people person. I was constantly observing myself. I was always observing other people. And I was always just very interested in kind of like almost the psychology of people and how we operate. But as I mentioned before, I didn't really feel like I was that intelligent to be like, oh, I'm going to be a psychologist. Like, I honestly did not believe in my abilities enough to do that. And so I was like, oh, well, I'll go into telecommunications and I'm going to be on TV, is what I thought.
That's what I'll do.
So that's what I'll do. You know, because people were just always making comments about like my personality or like ability to entertain or whatever. So I just thought, okay, well, this is what I'll do. And so that was my like education background and my work background. And with all of that being said, when I was making the move, I had it narrowed down to about, you know, probably 3 different categories that I could envision myself doing. And the first category was being a wine specialist. I kind of like pictured myself working at a winery in Colorado, maybe like the foothills of the mountains, and was just picturing this dreamy life and doing wine tastings and educating people about varietals. And then I also, because as I mentioned before I came to Colorado, I did that whole hot yoga thing.
Right.
It made me think, well, should I be a yoga teacher? Maybe I should be a yoga teacher. Maybe I should start pursuing all this stuff because this has been really amazing for me. And maybe this is something I could see myself doing. And then the third thing was my biggest dream was, well, what if I could emerge in this brand new cannabis industry and be some sort of example of positive use of cannabis where you're using it intentionally to support your well-being and showing that, hey, cannabis doesn't have to equal I'm glued to the couch, not doing anything. And like that's not, and especially as being somebody that's very kind of like driven and active, I wanted to be an example of a female who was doing active things while also using cannabis.
I hear that. Heard that. Got it.
So it's kind of crazy because now flash forward to today and I'm literally doing all of those things except for the wine thing. Now today it's like I actually am able to make a career out of this whole cannabis thing, and not even just the cannabis aspect but mindful movement in regards to yoga. So now I'm doing all of that, and it's sincerely a dream that I'm just so appreciative to be able to have manifested and turned into a reality.
Yeah, you go, girl. So awesome. So great segue. Tell us what you do, because you have a couple things going on. It seems like you're always adding to the mix. You like to stay busy. You're active for sure.
This is true. To be honest, I actually don't like to stay busy. You would think that I do because I work 3 jobs. But that's really just out of how passionate I am for all of this, and every single thing that I do is such a huge passion of mine that it doesn't necessarily feel like work. But what happens is when I keep adding things to my plate, I do get very, very busy. So I'm actually trying to, work on time management because I definitely can let myself get sucked in onto everything. So it's something I'm working with myself. But the 3 things that I'm doing right now that are my main gigs are, I've been working with Pure Hemp Botanicals, which is a local hemp and CBD company out of Brighton, Colorado. And I got aligned with them back in 2015 after I had kind of left the dispensary world. And I was appreciative to the dispensary world because I got a lot of experience and I learned a whole bunch. But I ultimately realized that that's not where I was meant to be, that was kind of just like a stepping stone. So I ended up leaving the dispensary and was on my search for something that could feel a little bit more meaningful to me in regards to actually helping patients and not being so much about recreational sales, which like recreational sales are perfectly fine. I could just tell that wasn't where my heart soared the most.
Yeah.
So
it's the
what
greatest
ended up
impact.
happening, wait, what'd you say? It makes an
Where
impact?
where you could have the greatest impact.
Exactly. So what happened was I had worked a little funny gig that summer in between being a bud tender and Pure Hemp Botanicals. And I got hired on as a ganja fairy.
Okay.
I was literally paid to be the ganja cupid of this dating website, which was really funny. It was called jointsingles.com.
Oh my gosh, that's genius.
And like at the time I had bright green hair, and the people that interviewed me for this position were like, oh my gosh, you literally look like a ganja fairy. And they were like, would you be willing to be the like live version of our ganja cupid and like represent the website? And so I did this because it's freaking hilarious.
Totally. Add that to your resume.
Exactly. I was like, this is a super funny thing to be on my resume, and just to say that I did. But ultimately, that wasn't necessarily what I was going for. I just kind of took the opportunity because it came to me. There was like a listing or something, or I got like referred from somebody. I can't remember exactly what it was, but the opportunity basically like fell in my lap. And so that's why I just did it.
Yeah.
But then, ultimately I did part ways with them because I was pursuing something with a little bit more deeper meaning in the movement. And what happened was I saw this Craigslist ad, and it was they were looking for people to join the Pure Hemp Botanicals team, who at the time was a very tiny little startup company.
Okay.
So like they were this brand new little company, starting from the ground floor. And all I really knew about them was that it was local hemp, where they were producing the hemp themselves, and they were seeking to create locally produced CBD products out of hemp, organically grown hemp. And when they were talking about their mission and the setup of the company, their mantra is compassion and action. And what they do is they make an entire plant-based CBD and hemp line. So, they're all about being cruelty-free and not using animal byproducts. And I was just like reading all this and kind of the consciousness behind it and the kind of compassion behind it. And it really spoke to me. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I work with hemp and CBD, this actually opens me up to talk to other states about this. Whereas before, when I was talking about, THC and working with cannabis in the dispensaries, I was really limited to only Colorado. And given that I am from Indiana, it was really important to me to kind of feed my knowledge and the things I've learned here back into my home state to help them. Because I know what it feels like. I mean, I know what it's like to be interested in this plant but not have legal access to it, and to be considered a criminal for using it and being around it. So I just always had this desire to be able to help my state. And by going through hemp and CBD, which was, nationally available, I was able to do that. So it really, really spoke to me. I responded to this Craigslist ad. I felt like it was like written to me, like, hey, Laynie, you should come work with us. Like that's how like direct to my heart it felt. And
that's so nice.
I like met up with the girl who was who like started the whole like events and promotions team and like the sales team at the time. And I met up with her and we really hit it off. And I got hired, and I was just like beyond ecstatic. I can't even tell you what it felt like, because this was one of my first like real big jobs where like I had a lot of responsibility, and I wasn't just showing up to work and being told what to do, or like following a certain like protocol. Like there was like a lot of freedom to it, and I was really kind of self-managing and doing a lot of educational events. And it was me and this other girl, Indy, who I'm still friends with today. We were one of the first 2 hires of this company, and we're both still with them.
Cool.
And her and I would go around to these little events back in like 2015, before people knew what CBD really was.
Sure.
It was like starting to be talked about, but people genuinely did not have a good grasp on what it really was. And even talking about hemp and saying the words hemp caused some people to be offended and upset back at this time. So I experienced a lot of people being upset and people hanging up on me a lot when I would call them and try to talk to them about hemp. They would be super offended. So that's what the starting days were like. It was a constant push for education where we were just going to all these little community events all over Colorado, talking about hemp, teaching people about CBD and what it is. And I really loved that. It felt really good. I could tell I was a part of something that was even bigger than myself and, part of a movement that was very big and going huge places, and that we were merely in the infancy of this movement. So it felt super cool to be a part of that very, startup company where you're truly starting from the ground floor up. So that was in 2015.
So what do you do there now?
So now my role has advanced a little bit more. I don't do so many of the events anymore. I'm not really on the promotionals team. Now all my efforts are on B2B retail sales. So what I do is I set up retailers across the country who want to sell CBD products and want to bring Pure Hemp Botanicals into their store. And I set them up, with their orders and manage all of these accounts now. So that's kind of where my role transitioned to. And also one of the main reasons it transitioned that way was because back in 2016, I endured a lot of trauma back to back to back. And I had one of the biggest losses it's actually the greatest loss of my life, aside from if I were to lose my husband or my own life. And my mother, who was my best friend in the entire world, we had like a crazy sisterly mother-daughter bond, and we did absolutely everything together. And she was super full of life, and we were just like two peas in a pod. And she very suddenly and very tragically died. And she was only 57 years old. It was super unexpected. She was, like I said, full of life. Her and I were actually scheduled to fly to Las Vegas together exactly 2 weeks after she died.
Oh my
So
gosh.
she was sitting there looking forward to this mother-daughter vacation we were going to take. She was going to Las Vegas for the first time in her life. She was super ecstatic and was like counting down the days and sending me text messages every day about it. And we just had a relationship where we loved each other to pieces, and we showered each other with love and affection. And we just, it's that love, that's
huge.
so precious. Like, I'm sure the love you feel with your son, the love that mothers feel with their kids, like that's what I shared with my mom, that like great vibrational love that's like the epitome of all life. Like, I had that with her, and I know how fortunate I am to have that with her. And that's ultimately, how I was able to get through this, because I realized how grateful I was. Super grateful. But honestly, had I not had all these mindful practices that like groom gratitude, I'm not so certain I would still be here today. Because as it turned out, when I said that I found Rachel's Ganjasana, that happened to be only a matter of about 3 to 4 months before my mom died. So I really attribute everything that I learned in Ganjasana to why I'm still alive today and why I did not kill myself after my mom died.
That would be like such a huge shock. And even for you to talk about it now, like 2 days after Mother's Day, it's like, damn.
Yeah.
How do you go on?
It was by far the most life-altering, life-stopping, as I knew it, event to occur in my life. By far the most traumatic thing that's occurred. And I really do attribute the fact that I was already very deeply involved in cannabis plant spirit medicine. I was already deeply involved in yoga and these mindful practices. And if I didn't have those, and if I didn't have my husband, who is my, other greatest love of my entire life, I feel like if I didn't have those things, I probably would not be here. I mean, I was like super, super suicidal. But ultimately, when I was in that really dark pit, what happened was every time I was able to crawl myself out of it, it was literally because I was just overcome with gratitude. I was like, well, you know what? The reason this hurts so damn bad is because I was so fortunate. I was so fortunate. And that's why this is so excruciatingly painful. And for that, I'm going to choose gratitude, and I'm going to choose to honor my mom's life. And she was my biggest fan by far. I really felt like a lot of things that I was doing were for her. So you can only imagine that once I lost her, I had to completely figure out
going.
Yep. I had to figure out who I was. I had to figure out why I was doing the things I was doing, because before I was doing it with the intention of, oh, I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to help like improve my life, my mom's life. And then I'm going to make all this money, and I'm going to give my mom everything she freaking deserves in this world. And those were like some of my biggest motivators. And when I lost that, I had to figure my shit out.
Redirect.
I had to redirect.
And
so now,
like,
oh, go ahead.
For you to say that, it's like, okay. And when we're living our day-to-day lives with so much to be grateful for, and we're not practicing gratitude, like it can get so mundane and like so whatever. And like, and as a mindset coach, like for me to be preaching all of these things all the time, it's sometimes like, okay, like you're being too positive and like, whatever, cool, you're meditating. But like, that was you putting in the work ahead of time to like take care of yourself ahead of time. Had you not done that, just what you said, like who knows where you would be. And so, yeah, that's really important for people to do, not to expect something bad to happen, but just to be prepared for life.
So that's the thing. The only constant in this life is change. And if you cannot learn how to adapt and flow with the change, you will be miserable and you're going to get left behind in things. So ultimately, I was just like, this is a huge dramatic change, and there's no amount of anger that's going to change it. There's no amount of me, wilting into the darkness that's going to change it. And all I could really realize was that, I love my mom so freaking much. And would she ever want me to suffer the rest of my life because I can't get over this like tragic incident? Would she ever want me to lose my shine and lose my abilities because I can't get over this, or because I've allowed this to encompass me? And ultimately I was like, well, the best way I could possibly honor her is by doing everything I can to deal with this trauma and to do any sort of healing I can, and to accept this reality and to move forward with my best foot possible and my best mindset possible, and then be a voice to help other people. So that's what I chose to do.
You are a rock star. Wow. Can we have a round of applause for Alayna? Thank you.
Oh my God. Thank you. Everybody has trauma. So by no means do I feel like, oh my God, I have this story and like, it's so traumatic. I really don't feel like that at all. I feel like everybody has trauma, and nobody's is like higher than the other. Trauma is trauma. And really the bottom line is we all have to empower ourselves with how to deal with these constant changes, how to deal with these traumas, how to deal with the feelings we're having, the thoughts that we're having, the experiences that we're experiencing, whether they're good or bad. We got to learn how to deal with these ways in a way that, is improving our quality of life and not sucking the quality out of our life.
Yeah, you have to learn to be resilient. And I love what you said, groomed gratitude. Like that's written down. That's a quote that people. That's fantastic. Okay. So one of your three things is pure hemp botanicals.
Yes. And
what
so
else?
The thing I was going
to sorry.
No, sorry. The thing I was going to mention about that was when I had all of these events happen, I could no longer give myself to anything there for a while. I mean, it was a big deal for me to get up and get out of bed and like stop crying in the fetal position. So in the beginning, I basically knew, okay, I have to have a conversation with Pure Hemp Botanicals that even though I absolutely love and adore them, I love the work that I'm doing right now, I can't give myself to it. And I am under immense gratitude for Pure Hemp Botanicals because they have really been supportive through this entire thing, and they completely understood, and they actually gave me paid leave. It's like bereavement leave or something like that. when like a close family, like your immediate family member passes.
Mm-hmm.
And so they allowed it so I didn't have to worry about my finances at the time. I could like actually heal and sit with my thoughts and feelings and digest this without being like, how am I going to pay my bills because I'm not working right now?
And they were like a small company, like.
And they were a tiny company that was just starting. I mean, they were only in their first, like, I would say year and a half of being a business, maybe, when this happened. Maybe they were going, yeah, I think it was like a year and a half. So they were so supportive and so loving and showed me such compassion. And I will forever be grateful for them for that. And when it was time for me to come back to work, we basically decided that all the previous work I had done to build retailers like all over the country, they just told me, you know, if you want to just manage these accounts that you've already done all the work to build and you just want to kind of maintain them, we are more than comfortable with you doing that. And I was like, oh my God, that would be a dream. So that's what I still do today is I still manage these accounts that I built. And of course I've acquired more along the way.
That's so cool.
Thank you. But that led me to when I said that I was taking kind of like a break and I wasn't doing my job the way that I was doing it before because I was like working on healing. Mm-hmm. I started to have a lot more time. And so I was going to like a bunch of yoga classes. I was going to a lot of meditation sessions, some breathing circles. I was just doing tons and tons of healing at that time. And then eventually, as I started to feel better and as I started to be like, you know, I would love to do some sort of little job, but not dedicate my full time to it, maybe do like a part-time job that would suit my, suit what I'm going through at this time. And so what had happened was I had a girlfriend who was working with Colorado Cannabis Tours, and we were at a cannabis event, and she was like, hey, we were really short staffed and we were like, we really needed a guide today. And I thought of you and thought, would you maybe want to sub in and be a tour guide for us when we need it? And I thought, oh my gosh, that's freaking perfect for what I need. I need something that's just like a side gig. I need something that's not really all my time and just like every now and again. And so it was a really perfect mashup. And what ended up happening is I loved that so much. At the time, it was like one of my favorite jobs I had ever done. It was so exciting because tourists come from all over the world to take these tours. And here I was getting exposed to people from all over the place and being able to talk cannabis with them.
Yeah.
So that really felt awesome. And I loved it. And it was really exciting. And I was like, whoa, being a tour guide is like so up my alley. I had no idea that this, I guess I never just like thought of myself as doing any sort of tour guiding, but I guess when the subject is cannabis, it really suits.
Suits you'll make it happen. So how are the tours? So like you do CBD specific, you look at the plant, like I'm imagining like business setting. I don't know, like who comes to those tours? What walks of life?
So every single walk of life you can imagine. However, we have different styles of tours and different types of people tend to go towards different types of tours. So for example, one of our staple tours, that's like our OG tour, is called the Original Colorado Cannabis Tour. And that is more like the Stonia baloney. We are hotboxing this party bus. We are driving around to different dispensaries. We are celebrating our freedom to smoke out of this bong in this.
I love it.
And pass a joint. So it's really about just celebrating the freedom because these people are coming from states where it's prohibited or even countries where it's prohibited. So to them, they are mind blown that they are very openly on a bus with a bunch of other people passing around joints, passing around bongs, and having just the time of their freaking life, consuming to however much they want to consume.
Okay, cool.
So in that aspect, it's very like party-like and celebratory. And that was the original tour I started guiding. Then it kind of evolved to I started guiding the essential tours, which are shorter than the original Colorado Cannabis Tour, and it's a lot more intimate. So instead of like a big party bus, the essential tours, you're typically getting something like a sprinter, which fits maybe like, I don't know, 10 to 14 people. And sometimes you're having way less than that even come. So it could be a group of like, I don't know, 6 people that you're just chilling with in this sprinter and consuming and going to a grow facility and a dispensary.
Okay.
So those are like the places we stop. We stop at dispensaries, we stop at grows, and we do a live glass blowing demonstration with one of our favorite local glass artists.
That's cool.
Yeah, so we do that. But then after I did those styles of tours for about, I think I did that for like 2 years. And then Michael who like founded the Colorado Cannabis Tours, he approached me about doing my own educational tour, which as
That's
you can
dope.
imagine, I lit up.
Yeah.
It was like so ecstatic. So he offered me to do my own educational tour involving hemp and CBD. And there I was being like, oh my gosh, once again, it's like melting all of my things, all of my specialties. So now what I do is I do a hemp farm tour and CBD class. It's a 3-hour experience, and we actually take guests all the way up to Brighton, Colorado to tour the hemp facility.
That's amazing how like everything just works out, people. Like, oh, when you let it happen. That's so cool.
Exactly. So it's kind of mind blowing because at this time, I had been working with Pure Hemp Botanicals. I had been being a cannabis tour guide. And now I got an opportunity to take guests to Pure Hemp Botanicals facility that I've been working at for 4 years.
That's so neat. Okay. So I'm curious to know like what your education has been. So obviously it's been experiential, and like you did Ganjasana and you started working for a CBD company, but was it like you just scouring the internet? Were you recommended certain books? Did you have a course? What's
on how I learned? I learned everything firsthand, and by like throwing myself into this industry and activism surrounding the industry. So where I first got a lot of education and just kind of like the skeleton of my knowledge when I was a bud tender. And that was by, firsthand experience, working with the plants, working with, not necessarily working with the plants in the fact that I was growing, because I wasn't growing. I was working front of house as a bud tender. But what I mean is that I was getting a lot of experience talking about various strains, smelling different strains, getting more familiar with the nuances of strains and like the differences. And then I was getting a lot of firsthand experience with methods of consumption. So as you know, at the dispensary, I mean, you could get a patch, you could get an ointment, you could get a vape pen, you could get an edible, you can smoke the flower. There's just so many different ways to consume. And so that's where I started to get the skeleton of my understanding of methods of consumption. And then because we were operating as both a medical and recreational facility, I was not only working with just rec people from all over the country who were flying in to experience a dispensary, but I was also working with medical patients. And that's kind of when I got a lot more firsthand experience of like anecdotal evidence of really talking to people and hearing their stories and, understanding what cannabis had done for them and the role cannabis played and still actively plays in their treatment and healing.
Yeah.
So that was like step 1. Step 2 was then when I got involved in the hemp and CBD side of things, then I started to become really, my world opened up to, holy crap, I didn't even think and realize how much of an agricultural crop hemp has always been, where it was used for thousands of different everyday items. I mean, anything from your paper to your clothes to fuel to building a car out of hemp, to animal feed, to nutrition. I mean, it just
endless.
It was this whole gamut and opened me up to this whole agricultural side of things where I started to understand just how many applications this plant truly had. And then by working specifically on the CBD side of things, then I got a lot more educated on cannabinoid science and what each cannabinoid is found to do within science and research now that it's been studied a lot more than it once was. And throughout this entire time, keep in mind that through my desire to be like a sponge and absorb as much information as possible, I was attending as many groups and conferences and, you know, local things that I possibly could. And this was where I gained a lot of knowledge, because I mean, I was attending conferences with like researchers and scientists that had flown in from all over the world to share, you know, their findings and share what they were studying.
Very cool.
So it was between firsthand experience at these various jobs and then going to so many different conferences. And then prior to that, I was just studying cannabis, you know, on the internet and with my own self. That's really all that I had was my own personal experience and the internet before I did all these other things.
Very cool. Okay. And then what's the third thing you're up to?
Okay. This now at this point has become my all-time favorite thing. Everything I've done was my favorite thing. And then I found something else was like, holy crap, this is my new favorite thing. But I love all of them. So this one is like, talk about being aligned in the stars. It's freaking totally nutty bananas. So as I mentioned previously in our podcast here, Shane and I are really into concerts, and we've been attending various live music shows since we were just little teeny boppers. Because also, if you don't know, Shane and I have been together for 17 years, which is like a very long time. So we're like middle school sweethearts and have been attending live shows forever. Well, we in recent years got introduced to a band called Ween. And when we got introduced to them, it like totally was like life-changing for us. It was like this band basically is like the music and vibrations of our soul. They and it's kind of funny to say that because anybody that knows Ween, you might know that they're very silly and they don't take themselves very serious.
I'm not familiar with the culture, so I'm happy you're enlightening us.
So they're very eclectic. They can play any music from like blues to jazz roots or psychedelic rock or country. I mean, they can literally play anything. They're musical geniuses. And so every show that they do is completely different. No two shows are the same.
It's a fish situation.
Yeah, yes, they get lumped in with the fish community a lot. In fact, Fish actually covers one of Ween's songs that's really, really popular called Roses Are Free.
That's cool.
So anyway, they're just like this hilarious genius band who kind of like doesn't take life too serious while also being insanely talented. And, you know, they have real messages kind of lumped in with hilarity, and it's just phenomenal. So, that is who Ween is. And what Shane and I did in 2018 was we decided we were going to follow Ween on their entire freaking tour. So, so instead of taking a vacation that year, like we were like, oh, we'll take like a little vacation and go somewhere like islandy or tropical or something. And then we found out Ween was going on tour, and we pivoted and we're like, oh my God, let's follow Ween around tour. This is going to be epic. And we were like, hopefully islands and tropical places will be there in the future.
Crossing fingers.
For us to visit, hopefully. But it was totally worth it and so amazing. And what happened was by following them around tour, we were able to, you know, visit so many different states. We ended up visiting 20 to 25 different states last year.
Cool.
You know, where we were able to experience different cultures and the way people live, and you know, just like the societal differences in all these different cities, and seeing super cool venues. And it was honestly the time and adventure of our entire lives. So flash forward to now, and actually, like, I guess flash forward to like a few months ago, and there was some buzz going around on the internet and on social media, and it was sharing headlines about some hearsay that Dean Ween, who is like one of the founders of Ween, they were saying Dean Ween plans to open up a cannabis consumption lounge in Denver, Colorado. And I freaking see this headline and like lose my mind. And I'm like, wait a minute. There's no way this is true. Like, this is crazy. Like, this band that we just followed around the country, this band that we love so much. And now we're finding out that this one of the lead guys wants to open a cannabis consumption lounge. Is this freaking true? So I like send the article to somebody that's kind of like in the know, in like the circle with the band, and who I like became friends with or acquaintances with by going to the tour all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I send this link to her and I'm like, hey, is there any truth around this? Is this real? This kind of just seems like some sort of, social media fake stuff that goes around. And she responds and is like, yes, it is real. And I was thinking that you might be really good to get involved as far as cannabis and wellness goes. And I'm like losing my mind.
All right.
Yeah. And it's because her and I had become friends on social media, and therefore she was seeing all of the constant activism I was doing.
Yes.
And so I was doing all this activism. I was doing a lot of talking about the combination of cannabis and yoga. And so she thought that that would be a good addition to the lounge. And apparently she was like telling Dean Ween, all about me, and that that we should do this like yoga class. And I'm just like, this is too crazy to be true. Like my mind is so freaking blown. I can't even express.
Mom is up there orchestrating some things, I think.
Right. That I have felt that very strongly actually. So that was just kind of like the initial conversation, but months were going by without anything really happening. And as you know, in cannabis, it's very, jumping through hoops, and it's a long way to get there. And you got to work with legislation, which goes in teeny tiny little increments and, 1 inch at a time. So there was a lot of hurdles, especially as far as regulations and legislation goes, and as far as social consumption licenses. So when I started to hear about some of the roadblocks they were experiencing, I thought, this might not end up happening, but the fact that it was even talked about is freaking awesome. And the fact that I was even like mentioned to get involved is so flattering and so awesome. So I would have just been happy with that.
Right.
So I was kind of preparing myself for the fact that this might not happen. And then about 2 to 3 months ago, I get a friend request, and it's from one of the guys that is running the lounge.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh my God, Shane, I just got a friend request from one of the guys that's like helping with legislation and helping to start up and run the lounge. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what could this be about? Because I was like, it's either about the fact that I'm a huge Ween fan, or it's about the fact that I'm in the cannabis industry. And I didn't know,
and either way you like it.
Either way I like it. Either way I was ecstatic. And so he sends me, we like start messaging each other. I like thank him for friend requesting me and making the connection, because I'm so into this. And if there's any way I could help through activism to help the lounge get further, I will. And so he thanked me for my offer, and he asked if I would like to come in for a private tour. And so I'm like, oh my God, I'm going in for a private tour. This is so amazing. And I was just tickled about the whole thing. So I like show up and start talking with him, and getting to see the lounge and what they're trying to build in there and everything. And after talking for a while, he's like, well, I'd love to hear a little bit more about everything that you do. And so I start to tell him everything, and to my like great surprise, as I'm saying this stuff, he like lights up as if I'm saying the most like amazing things in the whole world.
Oh my goodness.
Like, he's like, oh my God, everything that you're saying, I want involved in the lounge. And I'm like, really? And he's like, is there any way you would consider doing a class here, or like teaching some of the things that you're talking about? Maybe would you consider teaching? And I'm like, oh my God, would I consider?
Yes. Done. I'm signing the papers.
Right. So that's what's the most crazy about this whole situation is I'm now teaching mindful movement and conscious cannabis consumption, all the things that, I feel like my life has kind of led up to. And I'm doing it at Dean Ween's Honeypot Lounge, which is a cannabis consumption lounge in Denver. Like, what the heck?
And like for all of that to align, and just like it's wild enough, the connection, but like the legislation for sure. And like just getting all the hoops together and like the timing, it's just wild.
Yeah. And it takes a village, and it's really cool to be a part of this village in, one capacity or another. And I'm just so grateful to everybody who's dedicated so much time and effort to make any of these things possible. It's certainly not one individual. It's like this is such a community effort, and I'm so like impressed with how Denver and just Colorado seems to be able to come together and make things happen. It's very impressive. Magic. Yes.
So speaking of, grassroots, banding together, advocacy, you have been involved in the recent psilocybin measure, and, it's unofficial, but it looks like it passed. And so I'm wondering if you have anything to share about that, or anything around, education and consciousness around psilocybin, because it's like it's kind of the next hurdle with fungi, plant medicine, and reconceptualizing that with the public.
Definitely. So there's like I have so much to say about this. This could be a whole nother thing.
Totally.
But I'll try to just say some highlights. The biggest thing is that, first of all, we really had to address cannabis and how prohibited cannabis has been, and how demonized, and how much misinformation was surrounded around cannabis. And once we were able to start having this large conversation about cannabis, this really opened up the door for us to really inform people about the entire gamut of plant spirit medicine. That's not even just cannabis. Cannabis is huge. Cannabis is like one of the most incredible resources that we have. And exactly. So it's like cannabis was the big one, like this big like mother plant. But then there's so many others to explore and to break the stigma around. And in my opinion, it was a very natural progression to go to psilocybin. And the reason being is because if you look at all data from hospitals, if you look at all data of toxicology reports, if you look at societal threats, psilocybin is consistently at the very, very bottom of all of these lists. It is by far one of the substances that is sending by far the least amount of people to hospitals. It's not causing any deaths, as in like you don't just like eat the mushrooms and they physically kill you. Of course, I'm not doubting the fact that people can consume something and then make a poor decision or like in their life. Of course that's possible, but guess what? People do that on alcohol. People
surprise.
Do that on yes. So it's like, when we're given the fact that psilocybin itself is not physically toxic in a way that it's going to cause us to overdose and die, and given the fact that it's not sending people to the hospital, and given the fact that it's actually proven that people that consume psilocybin are they are reduced in violent crimes. Like there's a reduction of violent crimes in people that utilize psilocybin. And so it's not perpetuating violence. It's not perpetuating toxicity or overdose. So why is this something that can send you to jail? Why is this something that can make you a felony or make you a felon? And especially given the fact that this is ancient plant spirit medicine that we have used from the beginning of human recorded history, where people have been utilizing things like cannabis and psilocybin for innovation, for breaking rigid thought patterns, for evolving in society, for mental, spiritual, and physical healing.
Yes.
So, this is like, there's tons and tons of history on psilocybin, and in the grand scheme of things, we are living in a society where we're over prescribing synthetic medications that these various plants and fungi could help us more effectively, and as it turns out, more safely than synthesized medications. So, in this realm of understanding, you can really see how we shouldn't be locking people up for choosing to use plants. We shouldn't be demonizing plants, and we should have the right to choose, the substance that we want to heal with. Veterans should not be forced to take synthetic medications if those synthetic medications are giving them negative side effects. Whereas they could, go on an intentional psilocybin, conscious journey to actually face their demons, to work through their feelings, and kind of do a real process of healing by not suppressing the feelings, but rather allowing them to come up and actually facing them. So we're realizing, I think, from so many people having negative experiences with the whole gamut of pharmaceuticals. I think a lot of people are getting fed up with our current approach, and that is why we're having so much success talking about alternatives, which in my opinion are not alternatives at all. They're actually the original medicine.
Yeah, I hear you on that.
I'd also like to just quickly say, in no way, shape, or form am I being like pharmaceuticals are the root of all evil, and that no, they should not exist.
It's
and
misguided.
Yes. So I don't believe that at all. I completely see the benefits and the application of why pharmaceuticals are necessary. What I'm saying is that we should really rethink this protocol that we've been doing. And instead of going through the gamut of pharmaceuticals and then trying plant medicine, I'm saying I think it would be in our best interest to explore plant medicine and our food and our diet and our consumption habits before turning to a synthetic medication that is known to have side effects. So I just think we should switch that. I think we should, instead of doing pharmaceuticals first, I think we should do plant medicine first and focus on our food and, you know, our exercise and things like that. And then if you still need some assistance, you can turn to, you know, specialists and pharmaceuticals. Right. I just think that it's kind of damaging to throw pharmaceuticals at the problem first thing, because it is creating some, you know, addiction issues. It's creating some issues where people feel like zombies. They feel disconnected from themselves. And that's the opposite of what you want to do if somebody's depressed.
Yeah, like that's with everything. Like the plant spirit, fungi spirit medicine is connection at the root of it. And like
exactly.
And that's like why you're here, is to talk, you know, consciousness, whatever you're using, even if you are using one of those things, like it's important to be conscious and intentional.
Exactly. So when we're dealing with so many societal issues at the moment of PTSD, anxiety, depression, addiction, it's really in our best interest to go back to the root of our biological connection to plants, because what it really does is help facilitate connection and clarity and empowerment, as well as kind of work with the natural world in the way that we always have, that was successful for us before, you know, pills even existed, and kind of tapping into that spirit of the plant, which helps us tap into our own spirit and our own conscious connection.
100p.
Yeah.
So what are your favorite resources? Like, I don't know, just what are you reading? What do you like to go to if people have questions?
I like reading books, and I also like to just create conversations with other people who have experience with this stuff. So I do a lot of like communicating with people online, and I do a lot of like reading things. Like right now I'm reading the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. One of my first books about cannabis was a Ganja yoga book that I read a couple years ago. So I don't know, honestly, it's a lot of talking with people and my own personal experience with my own healing, where, you know, I can come from like my firsthand experience of these things and using these practice for my own healing, and then books. And then also one of my favorite things to do is I have a group of friends where we do intention setting ceremonies with psilocybin, and it's seriously so much healing I can't even express. And when we have these sessions, so
that
really
sounds nice.
A lot of it is my own relationship with these plant spirits. Like by me consuming these spirits and getting more in tune to them and communication with them, that's where I really get a lot of my insight and inspiration. So I do read like a couple books, but not as much as I'd like to.
Hands on.
I like to read a lot more. So I really actually attribute a lot of what I know to just the plant, like communicating with the plants.
And that's like, I don't know, I feel like that's hard for most people to do, you know, like for me, I'm like, I just want to read it. I don't want to have the experience. I just want to like know what I have to know, but it's really through your own experience that you learn the most.
That's how it's been for me. And, that's totally fine. Like, if you need to read things, like, there's nothing wrong with that either. So, we all kind of learn and experience in different ways and kind of have our own styles that really, really speak to us. And for me, it's always been about experience. So, just for me personally, I've always learned the most by doing and experiencing firsthand and being able to consciously assess that. I mean, I'm talking like, I've been consciously assessing myself since I was in like elementary, maybe even before elementary. Like, I've been a really,
Okay.
I've been a really consciously like aware person since I was a child.
That's a lot to bear. It's kind of like, it's not a lot of work to be unconscious, but like, wow.
It was certainly overwhelming at times. I would feel energies or just like an essence of things that I couldn't see with my physical eye, but it was like these deep feelings that I was experiencing. I've also been a lucid dreamer since I was a child, and that has fascinated me beyond belief.
Interesting.
I was like this little girl who really, I mean, I was born and raised in a very conservative place, and we did not talk about any of these things even at all. I'm talking really, really conservative, and I was really sheltered. So for me to have tapped into any of this and have this conscious awareness when I was a little girl is kind of wild, because it certainly didn't come from anybody around me. It was coming from like the freaking source. Like, it was coming from like the energy source, like the source of which we're all from, and like the vibration of love. And I've like been tapped into that for whatever reason since I was a little girl. And I've only gotten stronger in my connection with it as my intellectual state and my knowledge grew to kind of match these things I was feeling and experiencing.
Very cool. Is there anything else that you want to share, Laynie?
No, just that I'm so super grateful that you had me on here and allowed me to talk so much.
Yeah, this is the platform, girl.
Thank you. I'm like,
let it out.
Grateful. And I've admired you since I've met you, and I've told plenty of people about you. I think it's absolutely incredible what you've done, because you left something that was like what you knew and what was probably more safe to you. And you started venturing out in this world of uncertainty, but you did it because of your passion and your interest. And that's really, really commendable and really admirable. And I just think very highly of you for what you're doing.
Same Z's. The first time I met you, I'm like, okay, I have to know her forever. So here we are. But yeah, same path though, we're both like following our true heart, not necessarily what we've been told. And it's definitely tricky at times, but it always pays off. You're in Dean Ween's Honeypot Lounge. Hello.
Thank you. Yeah. So shout out there. It's every Sunday, 2:20 to 4:20 at Dean Ween's Honeypot Lounge. And you can email LanieGanja@gmail.com to get on the guest list.
Be there. I'll put that in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Cannabis, the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and give a 5-star rating. You can find more information about mindfulness and what I do at tidytour.com. Follow the Cannabis over to Instagram and connect with me through direct message anytime. Big love.